Hello everybody, my name is Snakefang and welcome to the 100 subscriber special. Now, I wasn't honestly sure what I would want to do for this, and Forlorn gave me this idea. So, if this is good, thank him for the idea, and I might honestly do more of these depending on the reception of it. But we're gonna be reading some r/nosleep since my main focus is horror games. I figure hearing some good old-fashioned scary stories would be a fun experience. So why don't you turn out the lights? Sit in a dark room, curl up under a blanket, and we're gonna read some scary stories. This first one is titled Thalassophobia, which, if you don't know, is, I believe, fear of water or deep water, ocean. When I was a girl, I was afraid of the ocean. My father had always told me to stay away from the sea, and that alone would have been enough to make me wary. One night, after I'd been sent to a friend's for sleepover, my father came to pick me up early and told me that my mother had drowned. The wariness that had been curled inside me thrashed at this so violently that I thought I'd drown in the dry room I was stood in. My mother had been an odd woman. She wasn't a bad parent, but it was clear that she'd fallen out of love with my father, and so I often heard strange, muffled arguments through the walls at night. None of the snippets that I could catch really made sense. She would complain how she wanted to return to the sea, as if it wasn't right there on our doorstep. I heard a confusingly intense plea for my father to give my mother a coat, even though she cared little for her fashion, and had always had the odd ability to shrug off the cold even when the winds were bitingly cold. When we returned home, the place looked ransacked, but seeing the state my father was in, I didn't question it. In fact, I didn't ask him any questions about the night at all. There had always been an odd distance between my father and I, but the loss of my mother made it worse. I became panicky at the mention of the ocean, a horrible fate when you live a 20-minute walk from the shore. My father took to regularly going out to sea, a change that horrified me even more than it confused me. He'd never been much of a fisherman, but suddenly his friend would call him about a sighting of some potential catch, and he'd be off. I was told I wasn't allowed on these trips. I could think of nothing worse than joining him anyway. I wanted to move far away when I left home, but moving is expensive, and I actually ended up a little closer to the sea. I hated it at first, but if I'd left, then I never would have met Sam. Sam loved the ocean even more than I hated it. We met at the pub, and even though his job was just renting small boats to tourists and taking them on little jaunts along the coast, he seemed so enchanted by the sea. He knew myths and legends aplenty, and had told me 3 before our first meeting ended. It was hard not to love his enthusiasm. Being around Sam slowly changed how I felt about the ocean. Sam never actively tried to change my mind. He acknowledged that the seas could certainly be tragic, and my mother's death was tragic. But his attitude was so different than that of either of my parents. My mother had clearly wanted to spend more time at sea, but something had kept her away. And on the other extreme, there was my father, who, even when he had decided he did want to start heading out on fishing trips, he did so with a bizarrely intense determination that had no joy in it. Maybe he's fishing for the wrong prey, Sam suggested when I expressed my confusion about the situation. We were both a little drunk when this conversation occurred, and right away I could see Sam regretting his words. He'd always been polite with my father, but never quite seemed to actually like him. What do you mean? It's nothing. I'm sorry. I pressed further, though, and eventually Sam told me. Look, it might not even be true, but I heard rumors that the big catch that your father heads out to hunt is a seal. A seal? What? I didn't know what I'd been expecting, but it wasn't this. Why would he? I asked. I don't know, but that's what Ben alerts him to, sightings of seals. Ben says your father pays him, but maybe he was making shit up. I didn't really know what to do with this information, and our conversation moved on to other things. It wasn't until the next morning that I decided that I needed to know the truth about what my father was doing. Ben confirmed the seal story when I found him in the pub a few nights later. He had no answers as to why my father would possibly want to hunt for seals, but he had no reason to lie to me either. More importantly, he was more than happy to offer the exact same seal alerting services to me as he did my father, just as long as I was equally willing to pay. Later that night, I asked Sam to teach me how to use one of his boats. He was surprised but more than happy to take me out after work the next day. I told him, almost truthfully, that I wanted to get rid of my fear of the open water. I was shaking the next day, but even when Sam asked if I'd changed my mind, I pushed forwards. That session was only 10 minutes long, and I returned to the shore dizzy with fear, but asking if I could go out again sometime. The first text I got from Ben, I couldn't do anything about because all of the little boats were currently being rented. The second I was at work for and didn't even see until hours later. The third was a charm, though, and I borrowed keys for one of the boats and headed out towards the cold, dark sea. If I hadn't missed one of those 2 earlier texts, then my whole life would be different. But instead, I took the boat out in the direction that Ben recommended, and soon I saw another boat in front of me. The sound of the shot alarmed me. I hadn't really thought about how my father would be hunting a seal, but I suppose I'd assumed he'd be using a net. As he pulled the seal's corpse onto the boat, I got closer until I was close enough to see the knife in his hand. Carving away at the creature he'd hunted, I screamed. My father hadn't noticed me until the scream. I don't know if the sound of the gunshot had temporarily deafened him, or if he was just so manically focused on the task in front of him that everything else had faded away, but either way, my scream drew his attention. "Stay away!" he yelled. I was close enough now to see he was covered in blood and had been part way through skinning the seal when I'd interrupted him. I stood up. It wasn't a seal in the boat. It had been a seal when he'd shot it, I was sure of that. I'd seen a seal being pulled onto the boat, but the partially skinned thing lying dead by his feet wasn't a seal anymore. It was my mother. He'd killed my mother. Sam had told me a legend about a selkie on our very first date. Beautiful shapeshifters who can turn from their human form to that of a seal by pulling back on the seal skin they'd shed. They love for the sea, but sometimes in myths, a selkie's lover will hide the seal skin away so that the selkie is doomed to remain on land. The myth Sam told me never said what a child of a selkie would be like, but seeing my father there, the skin of a seal in his hand and the corpse of a human by his feet, I didn't care. I moved my small boat close enough to the other that the sides scraped together loudly and tore my life jacket off as I ran at my father. His knife was still stuck in my mother's skin, and he failed to free it before I sent us both over the side of the boat. I unbuckled my father's life jacket and tore it from him as we thrashed in the water, and then I dove. I'd had no reason to believe that I could swim. I'd never had lessons or practice, but somehow I knew that I could do this. I had my father's neck in the crook of my right arm, and even despite his panicked flailing and massive drag factor, I was still making progress. My legs kicked forcefully, and I could feel my father getting weaker. I'd never felt stronger. I continued to descend even after he'd stopped moving, and when I finally returned to the surface, I was alone. I climbed my father's boat and gently stroked my mother's cheek. Her seal skin was partially attached, and I knew that nobody could find her like that. With a taste of bile behind my teeth, I held the knife that was still stuck in her and cut the coat loose. I couldn't bring her back with me, but that was okay. Burying her on land would have felt like a betrayal, knowing what I know now. We weren't too close to the shore, and it was well and truly dark now. Nobody would come looking for my father until tomorrow at the earliest, and when they did, what would they find? The seas are dangerous, after all, and sometimes people get hurt. It could be a problem that Ben knew that he had texted us both about the seal the night before my father's death, but I wasn't sure he'd say anything. Even if he did, hunting seals can be dangerous. An accident could be far more believable narrative than an unarmed woman who'd barely been to sea successfully finding and killing someone like my father. The knife we'd both used to skin my mother was thrown into the sea with her body. I kept the seal skin with me, though. I was too afraid to drape it around my shoulders. Would it be able to turn me as it could turn her? Was I ready for either answer to that question? Either way, I wanted it with me. It was the only thing I had that felt like it had ever truly belonged to her. Back at home, I dried the skin, hid it away in the back of my wardrobe, uncomfortably reminded how my father must have hidden it from her all those years ago. I remember how much of a mess our home looked when I was brought home from the sleepover all those years ago. I realized how desperately my mother must have searched and how well my father must have hidden the skin from her. I walked into the bathroom and turned on the bath taps. The sounds of water was calming, and when it was finally deep enough, I climbed in. It felt too small, and I understood why my mother had felt out of place here. When I was a girl, I was afraid of the ocean. Today, it feels like home. I used to work at a secret research facility in 2003. We were told to never talk about the wildlife interference. I don't know if I should be posting this, but screw it. It's been over 20 years and no one ever believed me anyway. Maybe someone out there can explain what I saw that night. This one's shorter. Back in 2003, I worked security at a government-funded research site. Not gonna say where, but let's just say it was out in the middle of nowhere. Far enough that if something went wrong, no one would hear the screams. The facility was a fortress, barbed wire, keycard access everywhere, armed patrols at night. Most of the time it was boring. Scientists came in, scientists left, and we were just there to make sure nobody messed with their work. But there was one project that always gave me the creeps. They called it Project Chimera. Guards didn't know much about it, just that it involved biological stuff, and that the scientists working on it never looked well rested. It was a quiet night shift. I was doing my usual rounds, walking the perimeter of the high-security labs, then my radio crackled. Containment breach in Lab 3, non-human interference. I remember thinking, what the hell does that mean? It wasn't unauthorized personnel, it wasn't security risk, it was non-human. I ran toward Lab 3, and when I got there, I saw two scientists standing outside, looking absolutely terrified. Through the glass observation window, I saw it. A deer. A goddamn deer was standing inside the secured laboratory, right in the middle of their high-tech equipment. Its hooves tapping against the floor. It looked wrong. Not sick, not injured, just wrong. Its movements were jerky, its breath was too slow, its eyes were milky white, and I swear to God for a second I thought it was looking directly at me. One of the scientists, Dr. Nakamura, I think, was practically hyperventilating. She kept muttering something like, "It's interacting with the Matrix, this wasn't supposed to happen." Then the lights flickered, and everything went to hell. There was this low humming noise, like a power station warming up, but deeper, more alive. The air felt thick, like walking through syrup. The deer just stood there, its body twitching slightly, and the machines around it started sparking. Then, for a split second, it wasn't a deer anymore. I don't know how to explain it. It was still there, but its shape was warping, like it was being pulled apart and put back together at the same time. I could see other things inside it, patterns, shapes that didn't belong in a living creature. The scientists were screaming at each other, trying to shut the system down. I grabbed my radio and yelled, "We have a serious problem in Lab 3. But the second I said that, the deer snapped its head towards me so fast I heard its neck crack. And then it was gone. No explosion, no dramatic escape, just gone. Like someone had flicked a switch and erased it from reality. The humming stopped. The machines went dead. The air felt normal again. They shut down the lab immediately. The higher-ups came in the next morning, cleared everything out, and told us not to ask questions. I overheard one of the researchers whispering that they found something left behind where the deer had been standing. A residue. Some kind of organic material that didn't match anything they had in record. But no one ever explained what happened to the deer. They told us it was a security failure, that the deer had somehow wandered in through a ventilation shaft, which was bullshit, because I had walked that perimeter for months. There was no way a full-grown deer made it past all that security. A few weeks later, Project Chimera was shut down completely. The lab was sealed off and the lead researchers were reassigned or just disappeared. I put in my resignation letter not long after. Sometimes I still dream about that night. About the way the air felt wrong, about the deer's eyes, milky white, staring straight through me. In the way, for just a second, I swear it knew what I was thinking. I found bloody tire tracks in my driveway. If we had a normal asphalt driveway instead of a concrete one, I probably wouldn't have even noticed it. But the bloody tire tracks stood out starkly against the pale concrete. And they were clearly coming from my vehicle. I froze in place. The golden light from my garage spilled out from behind me, illuminating them. They were dark and thick at the end of the driveway, fading to pale pink as they got to the garage. I must have hit something. I swallowed. I hated hitting animals. In fact, I'd only hit one animal in my entire life, a squirrel that had run under the tires before I could even blink. The blood was so fresh and dark at the end of the driveway. I must have hit it on our road. I crouched to the ground, my heart pounding, fearing I'd see the mangled body of some poor raccoon or something stuck to my tires. But there was nothing. Just the blood. I walked down to the bottom of the driveway and glanced around, turning on my phone's flashlight. But I didn't see anything, just the empty street dotted with cars, lights glimmering on the houses across the street, people moving inside as they got ready for dinner. Huh. I looked down at the thick, fresh, shiny blood imprinted on the concrete. Maybe it's paint or a puddle of discolored water. I finally went inside, somewhat unnerved. Said a quick hi to my husband and started heating up dinner for myself. I watched the bowl twirl in the microwave, but I wasn't relaxed. The longer I thought about it, the more it didn't make sense. My husband and I had hit animals before, and we'd never made tire tracks of blood before. I mean, did a squirrel or raccoon even have that much blood? Maybe it wasn't an animal. Maybe it was a person. No. I pushed the thought in my head. That's ridiculous. I couldn't run over someone without even realizing. But my eyes weren't on the road 100% of the time. I never checked my phone, but I have to use the stupid touchscreen to adjust the heat. What if someone ran out while I was adjusting it? What if I ran them over without noticing? What if it was a child? No. There's no way I wouldn't have noticed hitting a person. Even if it was a child, I would have felt a bump. I would have seen something. I would have... You okay? Dave asked, walking into the kitchen. Yeah, I muttered. Your food's been done for a while, and you've just been staring at the microwave. There's blood on my tires for some reason. His eyebrows raised. For some reason. I guess I hit an animal or something. But it couldn't have been far from the house because the blood would have worn off by then. But I don't see any animal out there. It's really weird. That is weird, he said. We faded into silence. I ate some, but it still bothered me. What if I hit someone and didn't kill them? What if they're crying for help right now, half alive, and they're going to die unless I get them help? Someone else would hear them, right? I would hear them. Right. Give me a second, I said, getting up and walking towards the garage. Okay, sure. I walked back out to the driveway. The blood was still there, shining gold in our outside lights, but duller now as it had begun to dry. I swallowed. That's a lot of blood. If it is blood at all. Okay, just shut up, get in the car, and drive. I backed out of the driveway and slowly drove down our street. If I did hit something, it wasn't far. The blood would have worn off the tires before I pulled into the driveway. If it were far, it had to be somewhere on our street. If it had even happened at all. I drove slowly down our street, high beams on. I scanned every nook and cranny that the headlights barely reached. Shadows pooling under cars, a pile of leaves and sticks. I didn't see anything. Maybe you hit a possum or something. Maybe a fox already came by and snatched it for dinner. We did have a lot of foxes. That was the most likely thing. And wouldn't I see a blood smear on the road? The road was dark, so maybe not. Either way, there was no half-dead person crying for help in the middle of the road, so my mind was at ease. I sighed and pulled back into the driveway. You didn't hit anything. Everything's okay. Everything's fine. I was so distracted in my own thoughts that I pulled in the driveway crooked. Sighing, I put the car into reverse to fix it. No. In my backup camera, there was a dark, tangled mass at the end of the driveway. Pale limbs, dark hair, contorted in a way that looked wrong. Dark, shiny liquid seeped from the person's abdomen. No. I just drove there. That wasn't there. It wasn't. I blinked, and it was gone. I sat there for a minute, my entire body shaking. Then I put the car in park and slowly crept toward the end of the driveway, peering around the edge of the car. My legs were weak underneath me. I clung to the side of the car like a mountain climber clings to the side of a mountain, every step feeling like I would tumble down and never get up. I got closer. Nothing was there. The driveway was empty. No person. Just the same bloody tire tracks from when I first pulled in. I leaned against the side of the car, relief flooding me, my legs almost giving way. Just my imagination. It had looked like a woman with white clothes and dark hair, tangled and crumpled, bent unnaturally, my mind barely able to tell what exact position she'd been in, but I'd misinterpreted what I'd saw. Maybe a trash bag or some leaves blew by, and my brain, in its panicked state, said it was a woman who'd been run over. Because I was staring at that spot, the spot where she'd been lying right now. There was absolutely nothing there. I finally turned around and made my way towards the front of the car, but as I took a step, I saw it, on the concrete, clear as day. Hair. A lock of dark hair poking out from underneath the car. No, it can't be. I lowered myself inch by inch. It's just a stick, dead grass, something. My heart pounded so hard I saw stars. I leaned down, but I couldn't see if anything was under the car. I got down on my hands and knees and took a deep breath. I can't do this. Oh God, please let there be nothing. My arms and legs shook. I stared at the lock of hair just a few inches from my hands, not sticks, not leaves, hair. Please, no. I pressed my cheek to the concrete and looked under the car. A woman stared back at me. No, her hand shot out, yanked me under. The concrete scraped my back, the metal chassis of the car bit into me, but she was so strong. In seconds, I was staring up at the dark metal underbelly of the car, claws digging into my arm. I was screaming. My scream sounded so small under the car, and that's when I realized I was alone. The woman was gone. I was lying flat on my back under the car, alone. Squelch. I turned, the concrete painfully scraping my scalp. I could see 2 pale, blood-soaked feet in the gap between the car and the driveway. Like the woman was just standing there, next to the car. Then she turned and walked away. Squelch, squelch, squelch. Seconds later, my husband came barreling out of the house. He helped me out from under the car, absolutely panicked. What happened? He kept asking, but I didn't have a good answer. I'd almost think I imagined it, if it weren't for the bloody bare footprints staining the concrete, fading to pink as they meandered into our garage. I don't think I've ever run over anyone. But how can I know for sure? I'm a cop. Was a cop. I'm resigning. Fuck this job. I never thought I'd say that to curse the career I'd loved for the past 12 years, but here I am ready to kiss it all goodbye. I'm not going to show up to work today. Not after what happened last night. It was 1:45 when I got the call. A domestic disturbance on the 1500 block. It was a slow night. I'd been sitting in my cruiser for most of it, so having something to do was relieving. The call didn't seem too urgent. A neighbor reported hearing a woman screaming down the hall of her apartment building. Most of the time, these calls never amount to anything, usually turning out to be a mother reprimanding her unruly children, or a husband getting an earful torn. Getting an earful from his angry wife. God knows I know what that is like. I didn't even turn on my sirens when I pulled out into the road. I pulled up to the apartment complex and reported my status to dispatch. The radio sputtered, and the woman on the other end confirmed my arrival. The static of her voice echoed through the night. There were a few curious eyes looking through the windows, nosy neighbors ready to see why a police cruiser was in the parking lot. I tried ignoring them, but even after all these years, it always unsettled me to be the messenger of malice, like the retreating dark clouds after a torrential downpour. I walked down the hall and the blinds closed as the bad omen strutted past the glass. I tried not to take it to heart, but it gets to you sometimes. I reached the stairs and made my way up to the 3rd floor. The hall was dark. A few pothole lights illuminated the passageway. They buzzed overhead with an electric hum, ready to burn out at any second. Although no one was watching me through the windows on this floor, I still felt like someone was there. There was a primal uneasiness that was making the hairs on my neck stand on end. Walking forward, the clinking of my shoes on the concrete, an ungraceful presence and an eerie calmness. I found myself fighting not to put a hand over my holstered pistol. I couldn't be the trigger-happy cop, the rotten eggs you see in the news, but I still had my fist clenched by my side. I'm a grown man, but I'm still wary of the monsters that lurk in the dark. Only after all these years, I've learned that people are the root of all evil. The father who abuses his children, the murderer who kills out of spite, the old lady with a murderous twinkle in her eyes. She was watching me through a crack in the door, her undulating eyes screaming bloody murder. It startled the hell out of me when I saw her. I hadn't even heard the door creak open. She whispered to me, beckoning me over with her gnarled, arthritic finger. My stomach was in knots. Something told me not to get closer. There was a vitriol disgust in my mouth, like looking at the necrotic flesh of a dying animal. Maybe it was her balding, unkempt hair or the toothless, gritted mouth, but she didn't seem too friendly. But I had an obligation to step forward, to help anyone in need. By the state of her gaunt face, this woman needed my help. Her voice was shaky, a mix of fear and malnutrition. What the hell took you so long? I was confused by her question. Fear was slowing my mind, but when I looked at the number on the door, I made the connection. This was the address that had placed the 911 call. I composed myself and asked her the details of the situation, but she shushed me, telling me to keep quiet. She looked down the hall, making sure that no one had heard us. She nearly closed the door in my face when one of the lights overhead flickered, her eyes pleading for me to come closer. I hesitated, but obliged. It's down the hall. It's watching us. I felt my chest flutter at the ominous tone in her voice. A horrendous screech made its way down the corridor. It almost knocked me on my ass. The old woman slammed the door and I finally had my hand on my gun. Far end of the hall, crouched at an intersecting passage, a woman, naked and bare, trembling like a stray dog. My left hand reached for my flashlight, but I had a hard time turning it on, instinct telling me not to look at the sickly figure caressing its knees. But I flipped the switch, the hall glowing a bright white as the woman was suddenly in the spotlight. She looked like she was crying, rocking back and forth, her hair draped over her face. Yet there was no whimpering. I called out, asking her if everything was okay, as if I hadn't already known. She looked famished, the skin and bones, her ribs visible through her chest. I took a step, her body shuddering as my foot struck the ground. I assured her that everything was okay. I'm not sure who I was trying to comfort her or myself. I reached for my radio, pinned to my chest, and requested EMS, but dispatch didn't respond. No one was there, and the woman had stopped shivering. For some reason, I felt like I just stepped on a pressure-sensitive landmine, and the moment I moved, I was done for. I tried swallowing the lump in my throat, but my mouth was dry. The air was stale, toxic, and I didn't know why. The woman's chest was pulsating, panting. I shifted on my foot, not taking a step, but just enough to disturb the fuse on the bottom of my soul. The woman lifted her head, and I caught a glimpse of what her hair was masking. Her mouth was stitched shut, globulets of blood dribbled off her chin. I couldn't see her eyes, still hidden behind her bangs, but the way the crimson tears streamed down her face, I knew they were also sewed. The woman perched herself on the floor, and I found my pistol already in hand. I stepped back, off the mine, and the woman ran at me. I dropped the flashlight and opened fire, the muzzle blast giving me still images of the woman barreling towards me. I know I struck her a few times. I saw the bullets cutting through her flesh, but she kept on coming. My finger was automatically pressing the trigger, and before long I'd emptied the clip. The last still image I saw was on the ground, and the woman was standing over me. I'd struck a few lights in the exchange, and now my dropped flashlight was the only thing piercing the darkness. I scrambled for the flashlight and turned it to the woman, but she was gone. I heard the door slam shut, and I violently panned to the source of the sound. I managed to catch the woman's foot disappearing behind a door, the same door that belonged to the old woman. Frantically, I reached for the extra clip on my belt. I reloaded my weapon and tried radioing for backup. I was relieved when someone actually answered this time. "Shots fired! Shots fired!" I said. Almost instantly, I heard the sirens howling in the distance, but that wasn't the only thing that howled. From the other side of the door, the old woman was pleading for help. Her muted screams filled me with contradicting resolve. "Help is on the way," I shouted through the door. The woman screamed as her voice gargled with the sound of death. I knew she was dying. I knew she wouldn't make it until backup arrived. I nearly pulled out my hair as I wrestled with my conscience. Unconsciously, I was already kicking the door down. "I'm dying," the woman screamed. The door started to buckle as I heard the squelch of her flesh getting torn apart. "Help me, please. I'm dying." The door finally let go and the room instantly went quiet. "Police, come on out." I tried to sound authoritative, but my voice was quivering. I panned the light as I walked into the living room and found the old woman standing in a corner, her back towards me. "Show me your hands," I commanded. The woman didn't move. I cautiously made my way to her and nuzzled my gun into her shoulder. Still, she didn't move. There was a lamp on the other side of the room that had shattered on the ground, and I frantically looked in that direction. Behind the couch, a person's hands gripped the fabric. I knew who it was. "Hands! Show me your fucking hands!" The woman let go of her hold on the couch, her spine unfurling like a serpent, readying itself to strike. The stitches that once kept her mouth shut were now ripped apart and hanging off her face. Though her eyes remained closed, she opened her mouth, showing me her teeth. They were filed down to a point. "All of them," she hissed, and I raised a shaky gun towards her face. "Get on the ground," I yelled. That was when a pair of teeth sunk into my neck. It was the old woman. She had latched onto my skin, her once gummy mouth now riddled with jagged fangs. The woman from the hall just stood there, listening to me fight to get the hag off my neck. I bashed her head with the butt of my flashlight, thunked her with my fist, pulling out clumps of hair with my hands, but nothing loosened her jaw. I heard the swashing of my blood as she sucked it into her mouth. My legs were starting to go limp, my vision hazy, and I was losing consciousness. The world started distancing itself. I was drifting away, dying, my body growing cold, my heartbeats becoming hollow. I dropped the flashlight. That was the last time I saw the light. My eyes no longer worked, but I saw everything, heard everything. The spiders weaving their cobwebs in the corner, their mouths smacking as they shaped their masterpieces. I felt the earth turning underneath me, the cold midnight air, the heat of the day cresting the horizon somewhere in the east. I felt the building growing old, the wooden boards in the wall slowly rotting, withering away. That was when I saw them. All of them. The apartment complex should have been teeming with life. The units filled with a rhythmic flurry of heartbeats, but the only thing I heard was the growling of their stomachs as they pressed an ear to the walls, as the old woman fed on my body, as my blood drained into her mouth. My heart pumped for the last time, and I no longer felt physical pain, but dread started coursing through my veins when a car's brakes squealed into the parking lot. Help had arrived. The two women retreated in the hall, leaving me on the floor. It wasn't long until a radio sputtered from down the hall and an officer walked into the room. Moments ago, he would have been my saving grace, but now I was his demise. His arteries pulsated in his neck. I wanted to sink my teeth into his skin to refill the void the old woman had left behind, but I couldn't. I knew this man. He was a friend. I couldn't do to him what had been done to me. Suddenly, the building was empty. While I was listening to the thudding of my buddy's heart in his chest, the things in the building had managed to scurry away. They were gone. Dozens of officers arrived and taped off the area. They sat me in the back of an ambulance where they tried to take my vitals. I refused, telling them I was okay. They took my service pistol, a standard precaution after an officer discharged his gun. I know I'll be on desk duty for a while as they investigate me for discharging my gun, but I'm not sure if I could sit in a room filled with a dozen beating hearts. I came home last night to find my worried wife waiting for me at the door. Someone from work had given her a call and told her that I was shaken up, but okay. I smelled the anguish in her blood. It gave her copper-scented flesh a tinge of saltiness. She hugged me and tried to kiss me, but I pulled away. I would have sunk my teeth into her lips if she had. I sat on the couch all night, fighting not to tear my wife's neck open. But the longer I fought, the worse my stomach growled. A taste wouldn't hurt. I stood over her, trying to restrain myself, but found myself tracing my tongue on her skin. She playfully pushed me away, caressing the back of my head. I lost control. And the next thing I knew, she was lying lifelessly underneath me. I waited for her to wake up just as I did, but for some reason she didn't. She was gone. I had killed her. My body was momentarily replenished, but at what cost? I was already growing hungry again, and the love of my life was gone. This was supposed to be my suicide note. But when I put a bullet in my mouth, it didn't work. I want to die. I don't want to live like this, to be this thing, this monstrosity. Someone is going to come looking for me when I don't show up for work tonight. I don't want to hurt anyone else, but as time drones on, I'm conflicted. Now I'm not sure if I want them to stay away, or if I want someone to come asking questions. I don't think I can restrain myself if they do. I'm not sure I want to restrain myself. Thank you again for getting me to 100 subs. It's gonna sound a little like I'm a broken record, but I'm just gonna say it a lot because I didn't ever expect to make it this far. I know 100 subs is not a lot in like any capacity, but that's more people than I talk to on a regular basis. I don't know if I could name that many people off the top of my head that I actually know, and not like actors and stuff. So it just amazes me. I'm literally at a loss for words because it's so insane to me that there's 100 of you here, probably not watching this, but subscribe to the channel. And I mean, it's just, I don't even know how to put the feelings into words. If you guys want to see more subreddit ones, I will probably primarily do creepy subreddits. I do have something in the works to do something with Forlorn, but that one's going to be a little less serious because we have stuff recorded together. None of it's serious, and none of it's been edited because everything's just kind of funny with us. We don't take things seriously when we get together. I'm already not great at taking things seriously. But honestly, I love doing that. Reading, getting to act it out a little bit. It's very fun. I really enjoy that. So I hope you guys want to see more of this because I'd love to do more of this. Probably not nearly as long as this one will probably turn out to be. This one is supposed to be a special, so I might do reading 1 or 2 of them in a video, not 4. I read 3 long ones, 2 really long ones, and 1 medium one, 1 short one. I'll probably look for shorter ones if I do this again. And if you guys know any like actual two sentence horror, those can be very scary if done. But I think that is it for this reading of No Sleep. Thank you, everybody, so much for watching. If you watched, you could have just listened to this and probably gotten the same effect. But I'm sure Forlorn's editing of the video will be immaculate as always, because he always does such an amazing job. Thank you, everybody, so much for watching, listening, whatever you did to this. If you enjoyed, please leave a like on the video. Let me know you want to see more content like this, because I would legitimately love doing more of this. Leave a comment if you have other stuff in mind. God, I'm just repeating myself. If you want to see more of my content, please subscribe, hit that bell icon. Let's get notified anytime I upload a new video. I think that's it. Bye. Wow. Don't put in the fart sound, Forlorn, I swear to God.